button. There we go. Are we recording? I think we might be recording. Okay. Any other questions? Marina, did you get that question? Okay. That means to relate the different CPIs to the base year. So if your CPI is below 100, that tells you something. So that means its prices are 10% or 15% less than the base year. If it's higher than 100%, then it normally is 10% or 20% prices have increased. So that's why it says related, explain it to the base year, and base year is 100. Okay? Did that make sense? Did you get that? They're totally different. The problems with CPI is you have a bias based on that they go to regular stores. They don't go to discounters. They don't include substitutions. So anybody would substitute a higher priced item for a lower priced item. It doesn't include any discounts like online stores. It doesn't adjust for quality. And it's basically 300 products, and it's not 300, 400 products, not thousands of products. So there's quite a few biases with the CPI where it's either too high or too low based on what it's supposed to measure. Now, criticisms of the unemployment rate are totally different. They're basically part-time workers want full-time and they don't have it. There might be discouraged workers where people don't work anymore. They're not even looking for a job. That's not included in the unemployment rate. You might lie when you're being called and said, are you unemployed or not? You might not go to the unemployment office. So there are different biases with the CPI and with the unemployment rate. They're measured differently. Different departments look at them. So there are differences with that. I would say, yes, we want zero unemployment. It's just impossible when people get fired and people quit. Frictional unemployment stops people from having zero. And then, of course, there's innovation. There's that creative destruction that always happens. So you would have a problem with getting to zero. I think Paul Solomon said, the lowest was 2.9. He might be a little bit high, but it really doesn't get below 2, even under Clinton and other times. So it's really hard to do that. No, the Cahoots, I basically want to make quizzes. It's Quiz, Ziz, where you can do them on your own. But the Cahoots, I mean, I don't know how to do that. It's normally with I can give you my code. I don't care. I'm not particular on my logins and stuff. It's just how you're going to actually use it and play it. I was trying to do the quizzes, and I've only gotten one up. So that's my deal. So I'll try the best that I can. What other questions you got? There'll be 45 questions. There'll be 2 calculations. One is how much did CPI increase? It's just doing like what we've been doing with inflation, stuff like that. What's the percentage increase? And then a problem like the nominal, real, and GDP deflator. So it's the same kind of problem like that, just with that. And then the rest of them are multiple choice. Like I said, they're split up between inflation. So there's probably like, 8 to 10 on inflation, 8 to 10 on unemployment, 8 to 10 on business cycles. And then there'll be GDP formulas, GDP, what's included, what's not included, what's included in government spending and not included in government spending, what's included in investment spending, not included, imports, exports. Um, so how prices are a problem, inflation. I don't think anything is difficult. The hard one is quality question, whether quality will, when products improve in quality, what will happen with the CPI? Does it overestimate CPI, underestimate CPI? Questions on business cycles, when they occur, how often they occur, recession questions. Jack, you don't need to know how to do the problem yet. That'll be something that we'll do later, but you do need to know what C plus I plus G plus NX is. You need to know what they mean. You need to know the percentages. You need to know what they include, what they are. But the problem that we'll be doing with CPI that I started is for a later date, and I'll do them later. But I will want you to calculate GDP at a time. Maybe say you want, instead of Trump, like he wants 3%, do a 5% increase, and then you guys actually solve for it. And that's my goal, is you solving for GDP and making GDP go up. You can, U3, U6, U9. U3 is just the normal unemployment rate that we have standard. U6 includes discouraged workers, and I think it even includes part-time workers. I don't care that you won't be tested on those. I don't even think you'll see that on an AP test, but realize that there are different numbers. So when people talk about unemployment, they'll complain to just make their point. So there are different numbers. I know people complained about Obama's numbers, and they said they were, the government numbers are too low. And as long as you understand the problems with the unemployment rate, you understand that they measure part-time workers and discouraged workers, you're fine, and you can find it and get it. Market basket is 400 of the most commonly purchased items, and they're purchased items. So it includes, something that might be movie tickets. It might include gas. It might include home ownership or rent. It might include food, but it's only 400 items, and it's measured every month. One of the questions you'll be asked is, what's the difference between the GDP deflator and CPI? So make sure that one is what's purchased, the other one is produced. One is 400 products, the other is all of the production for the US in a year. And if I ask imported products, obviously imported products are not included in the GDP price deflator, but they're included in the market basket. Imports are not included in GDP, so make sure that you understand that. I know, I've always said 400 my entire life, 300, 3 to 400. I'm fine, it's just a fixed basket. I've had different textbooks say different ones. I don't know anybody that works at bls.gov that can actually give me the exact answer. So it's almost like dependent on the textbook. I see 400 more than I see 300, but I'm not worried about it. And I don't even think I ask you that question, is it 400 or 300? It's just a fixed basket, and that's all you need to know. What else? Did that answer it, Ethan? Okay. Anybody else? I know I got Jack's a lot of questions. Oh, Marina, I missed yours. What would happen if inflation is greater than anticipated? Would debtors still be benefited? Yeah, they would. The benefit is because they get their money today, and they get $1,000 today that's got a CPI of 120. And then over 3 years, they're paying the money back, and the CPI is going to be a lot higher than 120. It might be next month 121, then 125, then 130, and 135. So each month, each year, the money is worth less and less. So if inflation actually goes up higher, these people actually benefit more because they got the money, today, and it's worth more than it is as they pay it back. They're paying it back with worth less and less money. So Yes. One of the questions you have to ask is, how would a business anticipate, say a business anticipated inflation and knew what would happen and they could change their prices, then they would benefit from inflation. I just find that very rare. I find that very unusual that a business can guess where prices are going to go and guess right and bet that way. Now, I know Southwest Airlines has done that with oil prices, but that's only with one commodity. That's not everything. And they've done it very well with oil prices. They guessed right. But, that means that you're doing it with every product. Let's see. Who else? Yes, that's correct, Gracie. Only borrowers and businesses that predict accurately. Because most businesses actually lose twice from inflation. They lose once because their costs of production are going up, and they lose the second time because if prices are going up, their sales are going down. So in general, I would say businesses are hurt almost the worst. Who I always say is the worst is the elderly that's on fixed income like Social Security. They're really screwed with inflation. But in general, businesses are hit twice with it. So yes, those would be the only two that possibly could benefit from inflation. What else? Question on macroeconomics. Components of CPI. What would cause the unemployment rate to go up or increase? And remember, I said, and I know I said it in most of the classes, that you could actually have a reduction in unemployment claims, and you can have good jobs numbers and unemployment actually increase. So you could have more people being hired, but unemployment rate goes up because of more people are now not discouraged. And if they're not discouraged, they're going into the workforce, and that could tick the unemployment rate up. So it's one of those things that when jobs are looking better, it's kind of weird that the unemployment rate could increase 1%, like a 0.10 is what I normally see. Even though we might want zero unemployment in a perfect world, can unemployment not go below? What do you mean, Jack? I mean, we're below the natural rate right now. If the natural rate's 5, we're at 4.4, 4.3. So currently we are below the natural rate of unemployment. Correct? I think we are. When does a recession become a depression? It's a good question. This is one where it's pretty much subjective. The 2008-2009 recession could have been it was called the Great Recession. It wasn't a depression. A couple things kept it. The unemployment rate didn't go much higher than 10%. It wasn't that long. When you look at the numbers, it was really the end of 2008, beginning of 2009. And then with the stimulus package and the bank bailout and all of those things going on, it didn't last a huge amount. It was bad. So I normally would say if you've got an unemployment rate at say 20%, 25%, then you're there, maybe even 15%. And then prolonged recession is what I call the depression on the cahoots. So if it's 2 years, 3 years, then you can have the depression. Most of the ones in the 1800s were with bank failures, loss of a lot of money, and they had high unemployment rates. So you're talking big unemployment rates of probably over 10, 15%. What pieces of information do we need to conclude that the standard of living increased? I don't know, GDP, the population, because per capita GDP is what the standard of living is. So you need just basically what is real GDP, what's the population, and then you get it, and then you see whether it's going up or down. Does that answer your question, Marina? Gracie is 2011, the first year. There's no other year before it. So obviously, if it's the base year, you start at 100, and that's normally what you do with a base year. That's the beginning year. There's nothing before it, so your base year is 100, and you go from there. So everything is based on 2011, and that's all you're looking for. And a base year is what you're comparing it to. So that's what it's supposed to be.
So that would be like our year one?
Yep.
Okay.
That's your farthest year. That's what you're comparing it to. And a lot of times we go back to 82 or 95 or something like that. But a base year is just where you start from.
Even if it's like after the year in question? Like it's later than?
I asked you, was there anything beforehand? You said no.
No, yes. What if there was a year beforehand?
What do you compare it to? You compare it to what we did. I mean, we did those, and I did it on purpose. The base year is 100, but you can see the year before it was less. It was 90, and that's fine.
Okay.
On the business cycle, yeah, probably 8 to 10. So I'm looking at one, if you consider a recession a business cycle, so 2, 3, 4, recession again is 5. Okay, I lied. 5 questions. So that's how many are roughly on the business cycle. Total are 45 questions. I think inflation, unemployment, and like GDP are equal up max. There is one velocity question. There's one Oken's Law question. Remember Oken's Law? I like that one because it helps us with our speeches. But pretty much inflation, unemployment, GDP are about the same number. 45 total. 2 calculations. And then there's the business cycle, and then there would be a couple assorted macro ones. With CPI, we're going from year 3 of 125, year 4. I mean, Jack, that's kind of like the question that you're doing. I mean, you're going from 3 to 4. What do we do today? It is 150 minus 125 over 125. And that's how you calculate it.
Right. And I think it asks what is the reason why it's not 25%? So is that just because that's not the
calculation how you do it.
Okay.
I mean, it's just pretty simple on that one. It's not, just a lot of people will say it's 25%, but we're comparing it to the base year and dividing by the base year. So I'm not going to ask something like that on the test. Just know how to calculate it. Make sure you know how to calculate it, because a lot of times when we do these, I've seen, like if you go to A to B, we'll be talking about it later, but if you go from A to B on a graph and then B to A on a graph, it's different, and it really shouldn't be. So we kind of make adjustments for that. But on yours, just know the formula. Mika, cyclical is not supposed to happen. Where's the question? Where did I miss, Mika? Why is cyclical not part of natural rate? Cyclical is the business cycle. Cyclical is the ups and downs. The natural rate is basically where you can't get rid of it, and it's based on structural and frictional. You can't get rid of structural and frictional. People are going to get fired. People are going to quit. And then with structural, you just naturally have jobs created through people, creating new inventions, new things. They call it destructive creation or creative destruction. But cyclical is what we try to stop. Cyclical is the business cycle, and we try to not have that. And that's why we have fiscal policy and monetary policy to do that. So that's basically it. The question doesn't ask why, but it will ask what's not included. Let's see. So, Gracie, you answered it pretty good. I agree with that. Do you need to know the equation? Yes. So, Skylar, you need to know the MV equals PQ. I think I'll ask maybe 3 or 4 formula questions. So there'll be a question on that one. There'll be a question on GDP. There'll be a question on maybe the inflation question. What is the velocity of money? What does it mean? So you're going to have both. You'll have the formula and then what is velocity? Oh, Marina, you want to memorize. Let's see. If we memorize everything from homework plus the business cycle, would you think we'll be prepared? I want you to do more of the PowerPoints and read the book. Go over notes. Homework was good, but, you know, I want you to go over the PowerPoints. I don't want you guys to forget the textbook. It's not the best one, and it jumps all over the place, but read those for things. Watch some of the videos. You can go to ACDC Leadership. I've got some that are on there. There's Jody Econ Girl that has good videos that follows the book. But I just don't want you to work on the homework. The homework is just basic general stuff, but I really want you to go more than that. Max, yes, there'll be Okun's laws on there. There's no doubt about it. So, and that's important because when I want you to fix the economy, I'm going to be asking you, you know, what are your goals and what are you going to do? And, you know, a lot of you will say, I don't know what I'm going to do with unemployment. Well, yes, you do. If you're going to raise GDP 5%, you know what's going to happen to unemployment. It's going to go down 2.5%, you know, for a fact, or as close as you can get. If you hit your targets, this is what's going to happen. So I think it's kind of important to know what will happen with that. So I think I answered Skylar's, Miko's. October had tape over her camera. I've done that before. Let's see. Other questions? Mia, I haven't heard from you, so what's your question? Kyle, no questions from you either. Come on. So yes, there's going to be the formula for inflation, who's hurt by inflation, the causes of inflation, the velocity of money, formula for the unemployment rate, the part of natural unemployment, Okun's law, and natural rate. If the homework doesn't define the base year, should we assume it's year 1? Explain. What's not included in GDP, what's a good measure of standard of living, why countries have a higher GDP than others. That's good from economic growth. Formula for GDP, characteristics of expansions, characteristics of contractions. That was a good one. What is not a reason for economic growth? So there's 2 questions on economic growth. Recession seems to be a couple of those. Miko, it is like that. But normally it comes from contracts, and it comes from union contracts where it was almost an automatic. So it was like an inflation protection that if your contract or something happened with inflation, your contract would kick in and it would give you a raise. And then once it gave you a raise, the business owner would then have to raise prices because their costs were higher. But it really is, people get raises, prices rise, people get raises, rise. So it's that simple. Marina, did you have the question?
Yeah. So it says that we have to explain the meaning of the following CPI relative to a base year, but it doesn't really give us a base year, but it gives us like
it gives you
year
numbers,
1, year 2.
gives you CPIs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is one CPI listed numbered as 100?
Yes.
Guess what that is?
The base year?
Yes.
Okay.
So we always compare from 100, and then did prices go up or go from there? So always look
Okay.
for that 100. That normally is where your base year is.
Thank you.
Let's see. Anybody else? Anybody else? So let's see. Open's law. It's about biases about unemployment rate, bias about the inflation rate. A silly definition. Again, biases with the CPI. Jack, is that a question or you? What's your question? Jack? What's
So
your
yeah, for number yes, number 4 on part A,
Mhm.
the reason it's not 25% is because when you subtract, is it one? It's 150 minus 125, and then you divide that by 125 and multiply by 100. That comes out to 20.
That's correct.
That's the reason why it's not 25, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you could put it at why is it not 25%? You're dividing by 125, not 100. Right? Right? If you had a base year, actually that'd be higher. I mean, I just don't know. I mean, it's basically you're dividing it by what you're subtracting it to. So it's 150 minus 125 over 125, and it comes to 20%.
Yeah. Okay. Thank
But
you.
a lot of people take 150 minus 125 and say that's 25.
Right.
It's not.
Okay.
And your first question would be what is the percent increase of inflation? So it's the same kind of thing. You'll get different answers depending on what you use as your beginning and ending year and what you divide it by. So I'll have ones, and some people give me, it's 20, and some will give me 25%. You've got to get the right answer. We end in 10 minutes, so just let you know that. Because remember, I said we started at 7:45. So if we finish in 10 minutes, I'll go ahead and restart another one, and then you find it and do that. Making sure that tenant, I'm not going to ask you about tenants, but that is more of a question like a fixed payment. So it's kind of like from the borrower's point of view is your payment is fixed and it's like $300 a month and inflation goes up. That's why you benefit. If you're a month-to-month tenant that they can change your rent every month, no, you don't benefit from inflation. You're hurt just like everybody else. Let's see. Cost push is where your costs are pushing up prices. So it's based on the price and availability. So normally it would be like minimum wage or oil prices or labor prices or anything with resources pushing up prices. Profit push is just where the company raises prices to make more money. So those are two different types of inflation that are caused by two different things. Miko, it's been measured by the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, since 1919. They came up with it, and it doesn't make sense. It's always been, I've actually quoted 400 more than I see 300. And like I was telling people before, depending on the textbook that you see, you'll see either 300 or 400, but it's a fixed good. I don't know anybody that works at the BLS.gov. So I'll try to maybe email them or text them and see what's the exact number. But it's a fixed basket. It doesn't change. And, once every few years, they'll add a product or take away a product. So it's one of those things. It's hard to get on there. I think I told somebody it took like 6 years to get the iPad on there. And it's not going to be the fidget spinners. It's not going to be a fad. They want to make sure that people buy it and it's consistent. Kind of like, they look at gas prices, oil prices, insurance, mortgage and rent, and that kind of stuff. Good question about CPI and GDP deflator, because that's going to be questions. You're going to have a couple of them on there. The CPI is based on what you purchase, and it's the 300 to 400 products that's fixed. The GDP deflator is what's produced in the country, and it's millions of products. I think the GDP deflator is a better measure. That will not be the answer on the test. But we use CPI. And that, again, as Miko said, that's more like tradition. And it's just the way it's always been done. We like CPI better, and I think the other one is a better number, but it's harder to get. It's harder to get the GDP numbers, and then you have to look at the others. So it's not used. So when I used it on the problem set and on the other things, it's just because, they're both measures of inflation. They're both measures of prices. You'll be asked questions, what is included in CPI or what's different between the CPI and the GDP deflator? How do we calculate real interest rate? That would be nominal interest rate minus inflation. So, and then again, you have real interest rate plus inflation is nominal. Should we be prepared for questions on factors describing specific moments on the business cycle? What's an expansion? What's a characteristic of expansions on there? What's a characteristic on a peak or a trough? What would be on there? So which is high inflation, high unemployment? So I would say know the different parts to it, yes. So the characteristics part and what is an expansion, what's a contraction, peak and trough. Let's see. Let's push. There, I think we got everyone's questions so far. What else you got? Is that it? Remember those reasons for higher GDP. We didn't cover a lot in the stuff. So why do countries have higher productivity, higher GDPs? Yeah, like this one, James, what's a characteristic of an expansion? Something like that might be asked. What's a recession? You can count that as a business cycle question or not. There's a couple about, it's kind of obvious, but every business cycle has what? What does every business cycle have? It's kind of silly. You draw it, but what does it have?
Peaks and troughs.
Yep, that's correct. But that was a hard one that people missed. So it's like, okay, I've done that on quizzes and things, but every cycle will have a peak and a trough. And that's how you measure it, how long it is from peak to peak. And it has that. So I think it's a fairly simple question, but those are the kind of descriptive questions that we got. Let's see, velocity, calculation, inflation. It's what we've covered in class. I think we've done a good job in class going over them. Intermediate goods, an example of the intermediate good might be a tough one. Can you tell me what one is? Tire in a car, car radio. So you got the idea. So could you be able to find it from a list of 4 different products? So when they're going, what would be an example of an intermediate good? You'd have to look at something that goes in to make another product. So that one was one that I think people had a hard time with. Remember Social Security, remember transfer payments are not included in GDP. Remember imported goods are not included in GDP. State and local governments are included in GDP because government includes state, local, federal, all of that. Business inventories, wouldn't that be in part of GDP? Everybody know what an inventory is? Okay, so remember it's gross domestic product, it's what we produce. So if we produce something that's on the shelves, that's still part of production. And a lot of people forget that. It just hasn't been sold. And that might be a trick question because GDP has nothing to do with what's sold. It's what's produced. So a lot of people have to think on that. Also remember the income method. I didn't do a lot with income method, but income would include rental income. It would include proprietary income from a business. It could include your W-2 wages. It could include your dividends and interest. So even though dividends and interest would not be included in stock valuations, things like that, if you earn the income, it's going to be included in GDP. It's on the other side of the formula. So know that there are, not only just W-2 wages, there are wages that you get from rents and royalties, from investments, like interest and dividends and those kind of things. Commissions is income. So absolutely, it's what somebody earned. Tire in a car radio. Skylar, what's an example that isn't part of a car? I make a pizza and the cheese on the pizza. That's an intermediate good. Now you can buy cheese somewhere else and you can buy it at the grocery store, and I bought mozzarella cheese, but because it goes on that pizza, it's an intermediate good. So we don't include those separately. What do you mean more telling? Is measuring GDP per capita more telling than normal GDP? It's a better number. It's what each person produces, but normally I think the better question is real more telling than normal or whatever, because you want things to be real without the, adjusting for inflation. I think GDP, if it's real, is fine, and if it's per capita, it's fine as long as it's the real number, not the nominal. We will probably lose connection in a little bit, so just be ready for that, and then I'll just create another one, and I'll just get the link online. Do you need to know how to calculate real GDP? No, it was what we did today. It was the nominal, real, and the deflator. You have to do that, is what will be on the test. So you're going to have that one. Okay. That's it there. So any other questions you guys got? I think you're going to be fine. I think you did well on the